Okay, so for those who just joined our webinar, I would like to welcome everyone again. This is Thursday morning and 9:30 Pacific Standard Time, so some people just early and they're drinking their coffee. So hopefully you're gonna enjoy this webinar because we're actually gonna show live demos of both Appium and Espresso and gonna compare those two frameworks for those folks who just still deciding, what to use and what not. So let's start quickly with the introduction of our speakers. So today it's going to be me, Igor. I'm the constant, presenter of this series of the webinars where we're going to talk about, where we're talking about the mobile test automation in general, DevOps related to mobile. And today we have a special guest, Aaron Weaver, who is actually Android engineer in Tinder. He works with me. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, he got stuck a little bit in the late traffic, so he made almost on time. I'm glad to be with us today. So thank you for attending.
LA, man.
Yeah, I know it is LA. So before we jump into the Appium and Espresso in context of Android test automation, we would like to share with you trends that me and Aaron pretty much see through the 2018 and 19, because both of us tightly work on Android platform. I'm in particular engineering manager focusing on release management and DevOps of entire continuous integration, continuous delivery, and Aaron, actual developer who's developing Tinder app. So for us, being in the weeds of Android development, we can kind of predict what's the trend for next year, because what we see the changes that we'll live through in 2018, and would like to share with you guys. It doesn't mean it's like the entire industry shares that, but that's at least within the Tinder company. I think it will be interesting for all of you. So what we noticed that automated DevOps process requires fast and reliable feedback. That means that every time developer makes pull request, we need to know as soon as possible if there is defect or not. So developers takes ownership. Developers just don't develop the code for Android. It takes ownership of CI and CD in context of continuous integration, continuous delivery. So there's a lot of checks happens at pre-commit, what we call pre-merge checks as part of the CI. Checks such as code static analysis, checks like unit testing, and checks like as a functional test in form of Espresso. We're going to talk about that. So everything shifts to the speed, and in today's world, I talk a lot of companies like Uber, Yelp, and other companies too who have Android apps that say that their CI is about 30-minute iteration, and we are also in that ballpark. So it takes about 30 minutes to do all the checks on each commit, on each PR, before the code actually made on the main branch of which the QA manual testers get the build. So shift from non-instrumental frameworks like Appium to instrumental frameworks as Espresso, and for the iOS as XUI test. What that means that in the last year, I talked to a lot of people from different companies, and everybody keeps saying that they go away from Appium because it just wasn't built to be part of the CI. Appium was more like a tool that helps, to run regression nightly or daily at some point of time, but it wasn't built as a tool to run each pull request. And we're going to talk about it later during demo and during the presentation. And we can see the shift towards frameworks such as Espresso and XUI test. Another thing, which is the very important attributes of be part of the pre-merge testing, is the speed. The tests have to be very fast, and this will be reliable. It cannot flake out. Support, it means like if there's new SDK comes out, you need to want the latest and greatest code available, and ability to support network mocking and test sharding for things that I listed above. Network mocking will actually contribute to both speed and reliability and stability, and test sharding will contribute definitely to the speed of your test. So all these are actually reinforce our thinking that everything moves towards more engineering effort rather than QA effort to support the quality of the product. Do you agree with me, Aaron?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially having written Espresso test versus Appium test myself.
Yep.
So Appium tests, from what I've seen, as far as speed goes, they all have to connect to a server first, and connecting to that server can be incredibly unreliable. I've seen it happen in 5 seconds, or sometimes even less than 5 seconds. I've seen it happen in 20 seconds.
So we're gonna talk about that a little bit later during the presentation. We're gonna show you the vivid demo of exactly the same test, identical functionality, same app, and test Espresso running on Espresso versus Appium, and all of you will, see it in action. Actually, the one demo worth 1,000 words. That's what I say, right?
Absolutely.
So let's go through the Appium. What's in the Appium? Appium is actually open source framework developed by a company called Sauce Labs. I mean, it is open source, but the Sauce Labs spun off as a project and open sourced it for the community to support it. It actually, believe me or not, it's Node.js server, nothing more, nothing less. It's actually a server that you have to run on your computer or computer that will execute your tasks. Could be AWS or anywhere on the cloud. It's using subset of WebDriver protocol over HTTP. So philosophy of Appium was that if you've been familiar with web automation, it will be easier to switch to the mobile. So they basically took the Selenium WebDriver APIs, not all of them, subset of them, and utilized them for the mobile test automation. And it supports programming languages similar to WebDriver subset. So like Ruby, Java, C#, whatever the WebDriver supports, Appium supports as well. That was, again, the philosophy of people who know Python but do not want to learn Kotlin and Java can automate Android. And supports iOS and Android and Windows apps. So that's the biggest advantage of Appium, with actually multi-platform support, which is actually advantage and disadvantage we're going to talk about in a minute. So what's the Espresso? Espresso is Android native framework. Unlike Appium, it only supports Android, nothing else, nothing more. A lot of people ask me, like, does Espresso support iOS? No, it's not. It's only been built for Android. And the funny thing, Espresso, it's just a name. It's been there forever. It's basically a wraparound instrumentation layer that's been there since Cupcake. And that made developers and STATs to write tests easier. But there is nothing crazy about Espresso as a framework. It's really simple APIs. And it's part of Android Jetpack now. It's called Jetpack. Used to call Android, testing library. Then used to be a separate framework. Now it's part of big bundle. So if you install Android Studio with the Android SDK within, everything comes out of the box. You don't have to do anything extra. Code looks like English, very easy to read. You use a Hemcrest framework, which was adapted by the founders of Espresso within the Google, which makes tests read like English sentences. It's not like quite like Gherkin, but it's very easy to read. And very small APIs, literally we're talking about 4 or 5 classes and maybe like a couple dozens of methods which will make this really easy to understand and for newbies to start working on. And it supports 2 languages. As of today, it supports both Java and Kotlin, which both are adapted by Google. As of today, Google using both of these languages for developing Android. So I created a table of differentiate the both Appium and Espresso, because a lot of people still try to decide which one to use, and that's why I think you're attending this webinar. And I were in your shoes some time ago as well, so this is good to have, good to know. So language, like I mentioned earlier, Appium supports any languages that WebDriver supports versus Espresso, Java, Kotlin. It's supported by open source community in terms of Appium. Espresso supports by Google, which actually brings 2 advantages. Whenever there is a new SDK, being released from Google, Espresso will have the latest and greatest updates within. Whenever Appium, because supported by open source community, it usually lags about a month until they actually get the new features into the Appium. It's supported for Appium. We support both IPA and APK files because it supports iOS and Android. Within the Espresso, we support APKs and now have bundles, which is not here, the new things in the Android. Code required in order to start Appium project, you do not have access to source code. It's black box automation. All you have to have just already compiled binaries such as APK. For Espresso, you must have access to the source code because Espresso is built within the project, so you work on the same workspace as the developers. So what type of testing, a lot of people ask, what is it? White box, gray box, black box? So in my perception, Appium was a black box automation because you don't know anything about implementation of the app, versus Espresso is white box automation because you can interact with the code, you will have to interact with the code, and you need to know the code base of the app you're testing. So basically, you have to be either sitting right next to the developer, like I do next to Aaron, or you have to be a developer yourself in order to automate Espresso. I mean, not necessarily a senior developer, but the junior, the Android dev who understands the Android app infrastructure. So speed, this is very important because that actually determines, is this framework ready for the CI? And Appium was obviously very slow. You're going to see that in a demo compared to Espresso. And I'm talking about 10x slow. So 10, not 2 times, not 3 times, 10 times slower, which is ridiculous, right? And Espresso is extremely fast. Setup, Appium was really tedious setup because of constantly changing documentation. It's a little bit, I would say, cumbersome. It's not very straightforward to understand what you have to do. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, it's actually the server setup. So you have to set up on the server side on your local machine. You have to install npm, node, and Appium. So a lot of things have to be done to start the node server on your box before you start writing tests. On the boilerplate side of actually framework, you have to set up all the capabilities in order to make sure everything works as you want it. So it's not straightforward. If you've never been doing setup with Appium, initially it might be really tedious process, but then it's once it's set up, it's kind of good to go. With Espresso, it's extremely easy. It's basically part of Gradle. It will download the latest and greatest Maven dependencies. It's like we're talking about 4 or 5 lines and then Gradle config file, and we're good to go. That's it. And there's no server running. It can run on any machine, runs Android, and it's, like I said, it's really a straightforward process. Flakiness of the test. We noticed we used Appium before, not within the Tinder context, but I use it at Expedia. I use it heavily at Expedia for about 3-4 years. And even lately, when we actually teaching classes on both frameworks, we noticed Appium is extremely flaky. And as Aaron mentioned, because it's a server, so there's a lot of things happening actually underneath the server that might flake out the test, nothing to do with the application or test themselves. And on Espresso, it's very, very low because those tests are actually instrumented on a very low level of Android. Object locators in Appium, we can use XPath, which is very common object locator. With Espresso, we use the resource IDs from R file, which are really like, I would say, embedded into Android bread and butter development, and it's really stable and very easy to identify them. Appium is used primarily by QA folks. I noticed a lot of people who use Appium actually manual testers who try to shift towards DevOps automation. And since they're not like really, familiar with Android development, so for them it's like kind of obvious shift. And so a lot of Appium users actually QA people. And for Espresso, it's actually mostly Android devs and STATs. STATs, for those who do not know, it's actually software developer in test. And those developers in test are actually developers that are focusing on testing effort for the Android. So this is the highest rank in like QA profession, I think, in my perception. Okay, this is not it. So hermetic testing. If you folks never heard about hermetic testing, it's basically testing in isolation. Like Appium does not support out-of-the-box hermetic testing. It's like you can launch the application certain screen with a certain state to exercise certain scenario. So instead of go through the user flow like login, homepage, search, you can go launch on the homepage by skipping login. That's what's called hermetic testing. So on Appium, it can be done theoretically, but you have to change the manifest file. That means you have to do special flavors, you have to talk with the developers, and we're talking about special build for Appium because you will actually modify the configuration of entire Android project. For Espresso, it's really simple. It's built into the Espresso APIs, and no extra code changes has to be done. Emulate and intercept intents. So for those people who do not know what's intents is actually transitions between the different activities, which is actually screens. And Appium was really hard to do. Again, it's also possible, but I would know because it takes a lot of engineering effort to change that. In Espresso, it's built into Espresso, so you can actually, emulate and intercept intents for the better, I would say, validation of, UI transition states and other things. And you'll see it during the demo I'm going to show you. Test sharding. Appium uses Selenium Grid technology for test sharding, which is more like networking solution. And it's not actually sharding, it's more like parallel execution to exercise different fonts on the same subset of tests. Espresso supports full sharding with frameworks like Spoon and Fork, which is enable both parallelization and test sharding. Means like the different tests will run on different devices and different permutations, and which is speed up the entire process of test execution. And out of the box, it gets you the video recording, screenshots, and logs, ADB logs out of the device. So it was, like I said, from early days, from 2014-15, we have the Spoon, now we have Fork. Those frameworks enables us pretty quickly to do test sharding, and which is important for CI, right? You need to do this, you need to execute tests in a very fast, quick fashion. And I think the most important for people who are especially part of the dev team is the CI, because it always determines, are the tests ready for the continuous integration? Are they ready to be running as a part of the pre-merge testing, as a part of each pull request and consecutive commit of pull request? And Appium is not. It was built to be post-merge framework and run as actually, after, some branch cut happens, or on a scheduler. So which means if test fails, you cannot, if test fails, you cannot find Aaron and say, Aaron, this is you, right? It's going to take you some time to understand it's Aaron.
Yeah, it's nice to know that you broke something in the UI before you actually insert the code to develop instead of after.
Yeah, yep. And Espresso definitely was built with mindset to be part of the pre-merge testing to run on each CI and actually tell developers whenever they screwed up. So I think that was good overview on differences, pros and cons of each framework, which is, I think, very important. And I think it's a good time to go towards the demo. But before that, I want to just summarize the quick, quick things about the, Appium and Espresso. From this comparison, you can see that, there's a lot of negative things about Appium, and there's a lot of positive things about Espresso. But in real world, it's actually not really true. Because I'll give you one example when Appium can beat the Espresso to the needs. For instance, if you're working on hybrid apps or apps built all React Native. So let's say you have a team who are writing application React Native, which is basically a JavaScript framework, like they develop a mobile website and then cross-compile to both iOS and Android source. That framework, and I mean about Appium, will be very handy in that case, because it will enable you to test both very similar applications on iOS and Android, and it works very well with the web views. So in that case, Appium would be like a very nice choice, because it was built with mindset of web automation within. So that's where I think it's very important to understand that if you're working with hybrid apps, I would consider to try Appium. But if you're working with a native Android application, 100% native, such as Tinder, I think that's where the Appium will fail big time, and that's where Espresso comes. So you have to make a choice based on your needs, and you will probably have to do proof of concept anyway before you start using either framework. So I recommend to play with both, just like we're going to show it during the demo. So let me quickly put you on pause and prepare a demo before we jump into it. So first, we're going to start with Appium. So if you look at the screen right now, you see my cursor. This is actually in the command line. We started the Appium server. Appium server runs on port 4723. It can be changed to different ports if necessary. So it's actually running on 0000, which is my local host on my machine right now. And as you can see above, this is basically logs what happens to the Appium server whenever we start running tests. So first, we're going to exercise the test we're going to call the intents. It is impossible to test intents within the Appium, but we're going to emulate the transition from the application under test into the Google Maps. I'm going to show you exactly the same test and how it's done on the Espresso side. It's because we deleted. Here we go. Now it works. Yep, we had to restart the emulator. Good to see. As you can see, test is running right now. Launches Google Maps, and it will verify it actually launches in the right address, 127 First Street. And the test passed. And if you can see on the screen, it's a very small phone. It took 29 seconds to run one test on the Appium. And as you can see right now on the screen, if you're familiar a little bit with coding, you can see that here we're verifying actually on the Google Maps that the text appeared for address we're passing from the app. Like let's say we're going to the restaurant, and then we know this restaurant locates in 127 First Street, and then we basically verifying the sequence, right, that happened, that yes, it's actually lunch, which is kind of black box validation. But in reality, if you think about Android testing, it's not validating what the actual app sending to the, what kind of intent is sending into the Google Maps. And that's the actually biggest lack of functionality in Appium. So if you look at this similar test in Espresso, I'm going to open one in a second, right here. So first of all, you'll see right away that it has an API right here that actually checks the intent for geolocation. So basically validating what the actual app, in terms of state, transition state, what the app is actually passing into the Google Maps.
And this way we don't have to verify that data is occurring in an app that we have no control over. We can't change the source code of Google Maps. So why in Appium do we have to check inside of Google Maps that something is occurring? With this way, we can actually check that our app is sending the correct information, and we don't care what Google Maps is doing with it. We just know that we're sending what we need to send.
Yes, that's exactly what the Espresso is the strongest part. And if you run this test right now, and we're going to see that exactly the same thing running in Espresso, exactly the same test, and we'll see how quick it's going to be. Everybody will observe this. So it took 5 seconds versus 30 seconds. I mean, think about this. It's insane. And you can see it looks, in terms of results, identical, but what Aaron said, we're actually validating the state of the application versus the Google Maps. We're not here QAing Google Maps. And think about this. If Google Maps tomorrow change, like if you look back to the Appium test, right? If they change tomorrow, things like how to find this title in ID right here on line 66, that's it. You're done. Your test is going to break, right? So think about this. Another thing is with the phone number. There's another very interesting test where we're going to test like actually the phone dialer. It's also the native intent when we transition from the application to the phone dialer on the phone. So if I run this test on Appium right now, which is actually going to go through the restaurant and then try to make a phone call, not actually make a phone call, but gonna check if the phone number is correct. It's same. We want to reinforce that, power of Espresso versus Appium when we do these things. And we'll tell you right away where it would fail on when you're gonna run this test on multiple phones. Here we go. Test pass. It took 20 seconds to run the test. And the problem is that this interface you see for the dialers varies from the device manufacturer to device manufacturer. It looks one way on the Samsung phones, and Xiaomi phones, or like LG phones, or like any other Android device, like One. For instance, One is very famous in Asia. And it could be like a very different dialer. Guess what? Your test will fail. Within the Espresso, similar test, if you go to Espresso, and run the same test for the custom microphone call, we're also gonna validate the intent that we're sending that to the dialer. We're not here to test the dialer for the Samsung or LG manufacturer, right? It happened in 3 seconds. You probably didn't have time to blink, right? So that's the espresso, right? Speed of light. So let's move to another different comparison. Now we're going to talk in context of the complex interactions. So great example is in application when you have like they call them date pickers. When you have to choose the date, you have to like scroll, like, you know, similar to iPhone date pickers. Sometimes the applications have what we call custom views, right? Very custom. So in Appium, let me show you an example of that. If you go to Appium and we'll look at the test of working with complex scrollable text, I'm going to see right away in the demo what I'm talking about. Give 1 second. Pay attention to the emulator, and you will see the complex date picker and how the Appium was manipulating that. So as you can see on the screen, it was slowly looking for the month of June and rotating each element by each element until they see month June. So basically with the Appium, we're using a crazy hack just for one picker. We're talking about one scroller, and then we have to like do this very complex gestures in order to find June, right? So if it is actually the 12th month, December, then it's gonna go to scroll 12 times. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? And then tomorrow, if any of this crazy functionality in terms of UI manipulation changes, your test is going to break like there's no tomorrow. Yeah. So now let me show you exactly the same test with Espresso. That's going to be in select reservation. Okay. One second. Here we go. Similar test. Here it is on line 38. Test select reservation month. So here, if you look at the underhood, the API, when we are select months and passing month 6, which is June, we can see that on line 57, we use the update date picker API, which is built into the Espresso already, and in injecting those things into the very complex controller. So we don't have to scroll anything. It basically injects everything. And Aaron can actually elaborate on this, like where this might be beneficial.
Yeah, so with Appium, you might have seen, or you might see that with the date picker, it actually has to individually like roll each number to the right spot. So like if you need to go to all the way to November from January, it has to scroll down 11 spaces or up 2 spaces, but it might not be smart enough to scroll up 2 spaces. Where with Espresso, it finished so fast you didn't even see it. It just knows that, like, if it needs June, it knows the position is 6 or 5. It's that smart. You don't need to scroll things. It just sets it.
Yep, and imagine right now we show you example only with the months, but you see there's more than months. There's months, day, date, week, time, and time includes the hour, minute, and second. Or imagine there's 6 wheels you have to turn. If you run this test in Appium, it's going to take you like 1 minute. With Espresso, it's instantaneous because it's injecting into the entire view control.
Imagine you have like maybe 5 or 6 integration tests just based around the date picker that need to test various dates to see how things are working out for each individual date. That's with Appium, that could be like 2 minutes, maybe like a minute and a half, something like that. And with Espresso, like running all those tests for 20, 30 seconds.
Yep. And the last thing I want to show you, which I think is like probably the most powerful feature of Espresso versus Appium, it is test rules. And I think this is actually going to speak of itself. Let me open you a test where I can actually show you this, which is right here already on the screen. So right now, if I run this test, it will go through what we call the user flow, right? How would the user use the application if it's just been installed? You go to the login screen, as you can see, and go to home screen, choose the restaurant, and verify that the restaurant, right restaurant was actually selected. So that's the only way you can work with Appium. Appium has Appium works only with launchable activities. Can you talk about launchable activities with the rest?
Yeah, so in Android, you kind of have to define what your main activity is, what your launchable activity is. So for most applications, that's like a login screen.
Splash screen.
Yeah, a splash screen or something like that. We have our own splash screen. You'll see it with the login with Facebook, login with email. And you have to go through that screen every time with Appium, unless you create like some weird configuration with your Android developers inside the manifest, which requires like separate builds. It gets really annoying, and not only that, but you have to make like 2, 3, 4 different builds just to run these new tests, which can take even longer than just the single build that Espresso would have taken. With Espresso, as I'm sure Igor is about to show, you can actually start on different screens. You don't have to go through the login screen just to run your whatever test you need on, I don't know, the restaurant screen, for example, in this app. In that way, this Espresso is super fast and just a lot better.
Yep, and then I'm going to demo right now. So basically, we're going to change, you see the activity test rule. It's the API available within the Espresso. We can change to like tab bar activity, which is what we see in the home screen. It's just the name of the activity. And then we're going to delete the login screen instantiation, and I'm going to change that to the home screen. So I'm going to say that now, when we run the test, we want to start from the home screen. And then when we're going to run this test, please watch because tests are really quickly. hopefully gonna spot this. Yep, don't blink. And you see it starts on the home screen. It completely bypassed the login screen. And this is the thing that we'll talk about hermetic testing. A lot of people never heard about that term. It's only possible on Android, to be honest. And it's not possible on iOS at the moment, unless you use deep links maybe. But you see the Espresso has this mechanism to launch on any activity that is necessary. And by using intents, you can launch activity with the embedded like state, like with certain like parameters built in right into this, which is saves a lot of time for test execution, right? So that's all we have for the demos today. Does Espresso has parallel execution of the test? And the answer, yes. There are 2 frameworks, which is actually called Fork and Spoon. And those frameworks enable the not only parallel execution, because a lot of people think about parallel execution differently. You can run the same test and across multiple devices to get device coverage. Or you can run, if you have 100 tests, you can divide it by, let's say, 5 connected devices and run them 5 times faster across these 5 devices. It's called test sharding. So Espresso, it can be done easily. Only the thing you add the Gradle dependency. Fork and Spoon are third-party libraries, but were specifically built for Espresso, yes. And don't think about Espresso as a separate library. UI Automator is a part of the same bundle. So let's say, because Espresso has one limitation that you can only run tests within the app. You cannot go outside the app. Where the UI Automator APIs can enable you to do that, to basically validate something outside the app. But they're all under the same library, Jetpack now. And they use the same runner. So it used to be separate runners for UI Automator and for the Espresso. Nowadays, you can use the same runner, same APIs, and use Espresso and UI Automator on the same umbrella. A lot of people don't know this, but for me, Espresso doesn't exist. It's just a name, right, of some like couple of classes. But it's part of the Android, SDK, which enables you to power testing. So yes, absolutely, you can. Are there any competitors frameworks in the foreseeable future for the native testing? I think that within the Google, there was competition between UI Automator and Espresso since 2014. The competition is over. I think Espresso completely beat UI Automator. By the way, Appium under hood is using UI Automator, just FYI. so people who didn't know this, now you know the secret. Under the Appium server, actually you have the meter, and it's a little bit slow, as you can see. That's why engineers in Google choose Espresso as #1 framework. There is another framework which is equally competitive called RoboElectric, and Aaron can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, so RoboElectric kind of fulfills a different purpose. It's really there to mock or make sure that Android components will actually bend to your will rather than just running as like normal. So Espresso tries to test things as they are, as a regular user would use the app, and just automates it. Whereas RoboElectric says, okay, I want this activity to do this, and then I can put this into a unit test that tests a very, very small portion of the app. So in terms of RoboElectric versus Espresso, Espresso would be for your integration tests, and RoboElectric would be more for like what your actual developers are writing to test their individual pieces of code.
So I think those frameworks complement each other; they're not substitute each other.
Yep.
Yeah, but I've seen companies who completely stay away from Espresso and use only RoboElectric. But the problem is you're losing the flow, right? Because like integration piece of it. Right?
Yeah, it becomes a point where the developer is actually controlling the outputs whenever you really want the application as a whole to control the outputs. That's what you're testing.
Thank you. Thank you. Other than this, there's no competition at all. An Android space used to be Calabash, gone, disappeared from Mother Earth. Appium is like only good for what it is for hybrid apps on the mobile apps. It will take the space for sure and will keep that space. But in terms of native, 100% native automation, there's no competition.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep. So what would be a salary expectation for QA with Appium versus Espresso knowledge in the Bay Area? Wow, this is a very sensitive question. I'm not in HR. I don't know this, but I'll tell you this. If you know Espresso, if you learn Espresso and automating Android, you like it or not, you become junior Android developer. I mean, it's just not even in question.
Yeah, you have to.
You have to. So Espresso is a bridge between QA and development. Means that once you start working on an Android team, let's say in any company, within the year you become engineer. If this is what you want, that's what you should pursue. Because Espresso requires your engineering knowledge. Appium is basically a project that I used to preach about. I used to be the one who running around different webinars talking about Appium 2013. But as of today, I think Appium is dead. I mean, like for native solution, it's over. I mean, you've seen it, right? I mean, there is nothing to say. 20 seconds versus 3 seconds per test. This is a joke, right? I mean, with the fast-paced DevOps space, you have no choice. So if you think you can short-live with Appium, you maybe survive. You're basically prolonging your career as a QA for another year. After a year, you're done. Nowadays, testers are engineers. That's why salaries are very high. I know Stats making like recent hires we get at Tinder is ballpark around 150 plus. So 150,000 per year plus in LA. So in Silicon Valley, Stats make probably around 200 compensation. So this is like, because you're a developer. So with Appium, we will be same QA doing black box, which is going to automate some of the tasks. So probably you're going to be making the same money as you've been making as a QA, regular QA or QE engineer, right? Quality engineer, which is probably around 100K plus. So, but I'm not HR. I don't know this. I just observe it what we like work with the people. I think being like Estat in Silicon Valley using Espresso, you'll be probably around 200K salary. I hope I answered your question, but you should talk to people from recruiting companies that probably have more contacts on the ballpark. In job market, QA engineer vacation Appium is more popular than Espresso. Too hard to find Espresso. Okay, so you're talking about vacancies, right? In terms of the jobs. Great question. Absolutely. Who wants to do hard things? So, you know, I'll call it echo of the past. As of today, 80% of quality, I would say quality managers, QA managers, don't know themselves what they're doing. I would say more than 80%, probably 90% of PM managers are just outdated. So they are listening to webinars from different vendors like Source Labs. Obviously, they will advertise their product because they need to sell their cloud. So yes, it's a marketing pitch, and it descends to the jobs. A lot of people are going to ask for Selenium WebDriver. A lot of people ask for Appium. But let me ask you a question. When the last time you did anything on your computer? Everything you've done so far in your life was actually on a mobile phone, right? So more than 50% of things are happening on mobile devices. So think about future, don't think about past. That's what we're trying to say. And last question, can Espresso be used for the Xamarin Android apps? So you're talking about hybrid apps? Absolutely not. That's where the Appium is actually beating the Espresso. If you want to use Xamarin, use the Appium. If you want to use native apps, use Espresso. I'm seeing test and before annotation. Does it mean that Espresso is also compatible with TestNG? No. Unfortunately, Espresso compatible only with the JUnit 3 and JUnit 4. That's what the Android teams have chosen. I think that's all we have for the questions. I would like to thank Aaron for joining us today, and Boris spotting us on the side.
Thank you for having me.
If you guys have any questions, we have a website called codefitness.us. All of you are going to receive emails with our Facebook group for Code Fitness and our website. Feel free to write us questions. If you have any questions offline, we'll be more than happy to answer at any time. And Aaron, thank you again for joining us, and thank you guys for joining us. And you'll receive the recording of this webinar tomorrow. Okay, have a good rest of the day and take care.